When my brother Ben died, his name slid onto every envelope that used to come to me second. Wills, keys, codes, a list of tenants I'd never met. The phone rang twice that week, and both times it was someone in a fitted suit speaking like sympathy was part of their job description. I kept answering anyway. Grief makes you polite. It also makes you slow. I moved through the townhouse like the air was thicker than usual, touching the backs of chairs as if they might steady me. Ben and I were not the hugging kind. We shared jokes that didn't need punchlines and favored the kind of practical love you can stack in a cabinet. Spare batteries, folded linens, a flashlight in the same spot every year. For a long time, he was the only person who stayed when everyone else excused themselves. When he left, there wasn't even a slam, just an absence that felt too well-behaved. On a Wednesday that tasted like old coffee, I drove into downtown Columbus to sit across from an attorney with careful hair and a desk that swallowed the room. Her name was Carla Mendoza. She introduced herself like a pilot, calm, unhurried, certain we would land. She asked if I needed water. I said yes because holding a cup gave my hands a task. The paperwork was a stack of quiet shocks, buildings I had walked past without noticing. Parcels on the edge of town where the dirt still holds the heat after sunset. Accounts arranged like nesting dolls. It was all signed over to me with Ben's meticulous initials, each be the same slight tilt. My eyes blurred at the edges while Carla read. She paused when she reached the trust, then kept going. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and new folders. I wanted to tell her I understood numbers until they belonged to me. After that, they turned into weather, real but hard to hold. She closed the file and I realized my shoulders were near my ears. I set the cup down and pressed my palms to my skirt like that might iron me flat. We were both quiet long enough for the elevator down the hall to breathe open and shut. Then someone knocked. "Come in," Carla said. Two adults stepped through the doorway as if their feet remembered this carpet. Ryan first, broad-shouldered, neat jaw, the kind of smile that promises he doesn't expect trouble. Chloe just behind him, tall, hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes brighter. I hadn't seen either of them in 21 years. The last time, they had spoken to me in a living room that wasn't mine, and I had walked out carrying a small bag and a big silence. "Mom," Chloe said, testing the word like a key she hadn't used in a long time. It landed inside me and broke something small. I didn't offer it back. Ryan said my given name and then corrected himself. "Mom, we came as soon as we heard." There is a particular kind of practiced concern you only notice when you've run out of favors to ask. It wears softness like a badge and keeps glancing at the clock. I recognized it now, even though my chest still tightened with an animal hope I thought I had trained away. When family leaves for more than a decade and returns without a map, they are rarely lost. They are usually working a route. Carla stood, professional curiosity flickering across her face and then disappearing. She gestured toward the chairs in front of the desk. Ryan sat. Chloe chose the edge, back straight, fingers pressed together in her lap like she was guarding a secret from her own hands. "I'm sorry for your loss," Chloe said to me, then to the space, then to her shoes. "Thank you," I answered because I was raised to answer that sentence, even when the mouth saying it had been missing for 2 decades. Ryan cleared his throat. "We saw the notice in the paper," he said. "We would have called sooner, but we wanted to come in person. To help." The word help carried too many meanings. It always had. Carla introduced herself and explained, in the kind of measured tone that kept strangers from arguing, that the estate had already transferred according to Ben's instructions. She used short sentences. Even grief understands short sentences. Ryan nodded along like a man hearing a song he already knows, but waiting for the chorus anyway. Chloe's mouth thinned, not surprised, just adjusting. "We're not here to contest anything," Ryan said quickly. "We just want to make sure you're okay. This is a lot to manage alone." He said alone the way people say storm when they're standing on your porch with an umbrella they'd like to sell you. I looked at them the way you look at a photograph too long. The familiar parts grew strange. The strange parts sharpened until they hurt. I thought of Ben, who once told me that people rarely arrive out of the blue. They circle first. He'd said it while fixing a loose hinge and never looked up from the screwdriver. The advice was shaped like hardware. Simple, cold, true. I appreciate your concern, I said. Carla and I were just finishing. Silence is a tool if you don't rush to fill it. I let it sit there between us like a third chair. Ryan filled it. We took a room at the Linden Square Inn, he said, naming a hotel close enough to make a point. We'll stay a few days. If you need anything, paperwork, calls, moving things, we can handle it. Chloe reached into a pale tote and placed a wax paper bag on the desk. A bakery sticker smiled up at me in cheerful script. They're honey rolls, she said. You used to like those. On Saturdays. I didn't correct her. Back then, it had been cinnamon twists from the corner shop near Broad Street, the one that switched to muffins when they lost their baker. The memory arrived complete with the sound of the bell above the door and the way sugar sticks to a brown paper bag no matter how carefully you carry it. Grief is a collector. It keeps small things like that. Carla stood. Ms. Hart has my direct line, she said. We'll schedule anything further through my office. Ms. Hart. The name fit cleanly like a coat returned from the tailor. Ryan's eyes slid to the stack of signed forms on the blotter. He didn't linger, but he saw. I felt it. He turned the same smile up a notch, still polite, now warmer. Polished warmth is a mirror. Pretty, but all you get back is your own face. On the walk out, Chloe touched my sleeve the way you brush lint away from a stranger. Can we stop by later? She asked. Just to check in. Not today, I said, and surprised myself with how even it sounded. I have arrangements to make. They left with the careful steps of people on a stage. Carla exhaled in a way that didn't quite become a sigh. Do you want me to notify security if they return here? She asked. That won't be necessary, I said, and it wasn't bravado. It was a decision I could feel in my bones the way you can feel a storm recede without looking at the sky. Outside, the sidewalk was bright and cold. I carried the honey rolls like an object lesson and set them on the passenger seat. The drive home was a string of red lights. I didn't mind. Every pause gave me room to recalibrate the picture. My brother gone, his ledgers breathing under my roof, the two people who once called me nothing now calling me mother again with mouths that had practiced the word in the mirror. At the townhouse, the air carried Ben's faint habit of cedar blocks and spearmint gum. My brother made everything smell like a clean drawer. I set the paperwork on the dining table, the one Ben had always insisted was too long for two people, and stood there until the clock in the hall cleared its throat. I found his last envelope in the folder Carla had handed me, off-white, heavier than it looked, my name written in his straight, schoolboy print. Inside, for short paragraphs on lined paper, each sentence like step. He didn't spend words on grief. He wrote about duty like it was a lamp you keep lit even when you leave the room. He said he trusted me to know the difference between kindness and access. He said staying counts, and some debts are paid in presents. The letter warmed and chilled me at the same time. I slid it back into its sleeve and placed it in the cedar tray where he had kept spare keys. Then I walked the property list again, not because I doubted what I'd heard, but because reading the names Ridgeview Storage, 3rd and Maple Lofts, West Side lots 14 to 18, made the responsibility feel less like a story and more like a map. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from an unknown number that wasn't unknown at all. We'll be nearby this week. Please let us help. Love, Chloe. Love. A small, complicated word trying to make a long jump. I put the phone face down and watched the light move across the floorboards, thin and sure. I tried to catalog what I felt. Not anger. That had burned off years back. Not fear. Something quieter, like a door inside me had been shut carefully and someone was now turning the handle from the other side. Testing forgive. Ben once told me that mercy and boundaries are cousins. You can invite one in without letting the other out. I hadn't understood it then. I did now. I made a simple list in a fresh notebook Ben had never used. First line, call Carla about the insurance riders. Second line, walk the Ridgeview lease renewals. Third line, do not mistake apologies for agreements. I wrote the last one twice, not for the page, but for my hands. The bell at the front chimed. Not the door, my old mantel clock, marking the top of the hour with a sound that always felt like a polite reminder to breathe. I did. Then the actual door knocked. 3 measured taps that pretended patience. I didn't have to look to know who stood on the porch with their practiced faces and a paper bag that smelled like good intentions. I let the sound fade. I stayed still in the hallway and watched the beveled glass blur the shapes outside into watercolor. If I opened the door now, the scene would start and we would all have our lines. If I didn't, the scene would end before it began. I chose the quiet ending. The knocking stopped. A minute passed. Footsteps, then a car starting, then the kind of silence that doesn't press, just sits. I went back to the table, placed Ben's letter on top of the stack like a paperweight, and stood up straighter than I had in days. I was not alone. I had a brother's handwriting. I had a lawyer who spoke in short, clear sentences. I had a house with locks Ben had replaced the year he decided the porch light should be automatic. And I had something I hadn't recognized until the moment I didn't open the door. I had final say. Across the room, the phone lit again. Another message, this one from Ryan. We found a great coffee spot around the corner. We'll bring you something tomorrow. Your favorite. I typed one sentence and sent it without reading it twice. Please don't come by unannounced. Coordinate through Carla. The bubbles appeared, then disappeared, then returned with a single word. Okay. It was the politest end to a conversation I'd had with him in 2 decades. It felt like a beginning. I didn't know anyone but myself. I closed the notebook and slid it under Ben's tray. The evening set in with its slow blue wash. Somewhere outside, a train gave a long, patient horn, and for the first time since Ben's last morning, I felt the townhouse settle around me like a coat that had finally learned my shape. Tomorrow there would be calls, paperwork, lists that grow new lists, and likely a return visit with the same smiles, the same soft edges, the same careful offers. They would try again. People always do when they believe you are a door. But tonight I would sit in the quiet and let the clock remind me to breathe. I would break a honey roll in half and taste what sweetness I could salvage from a day that tried very hard to be something else. And I would draw one more line in that new notebook, underlined twice. My doors open only by invitation. The morning after felt ordinary in the cruel way grief always does. The light came through the blinds without hesitation, laying its pale geometry across the floor as if nothing monumental had ended. I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the neighborhood slide awake, joggers with earbuds, a delivery truck reversing, someone walking a golden retriever that looked too happy for the hour. The world never pauses where it should. Ben used to call mornings inventory time. He believed every new day started with a list, even if you didn't write it down. If you don't name what you have, he'd said once, you'll confuse it with what you want. It sounded like something from a manual, but it stuck. So I took my inventory out loud. 1 house that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. 1 brother gone. 1 lawyer on retainer. 2 children I hadn't raised, but who now spoke as if they'd never stopped knowing me. And 1 small, stubborn pulse inside my chest that refused to confuse guilt with duty. The phone buzzed again, a text from Ryan. Morning. Just checking in. We'll give you space today. He always worded things like an agreement you hadn't signed. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Ben's office, the smallest room in the house, his version of a vault. The walls were lined with ledgers, and the smell of paper had outlasted him. The desk was too neat, which meant he'd left it that way deliberately. My brother was not a man who tidied for aesthetics. He organized for continuity, as if he expected to return mid-task. In the center drawer, under a slim calculator and 2 pens, I found a small black notebook held shut with a red rubber band. Inside, columns of names, dates, addresses. Not personal contacts, but tenants, renters, contractors, people who owed or were owed. And near the back, in Ben's type print, if something happens, start with the lake house. The word sank through me like a stone. There was no lake house listed in the official paperwork. Carla hadn't mentioned one either. I stared at the sentence until it began to feel like a whisper meant for motion. Ben never wrote anything unnecessary. He didn't hint, he instructed. That was when I noticed the envelope taped to the back cover, thick and unsealed. Inside, a single brass key on a loop of green thread, and a folded note that simply said, "Trust the first ledger, not the second." A message like that doesn't ask questions, it creates them. Before I could start forming theories, my phone rang again, not a text to call. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something about the timing made my hand move before thought could intervene. "Ms. Hart," a woman's voice said, crisp but hurried. "Yes, this is Elaine from Ridgeview Storage. I'm calling about your account. There's been some confusion. The access code was used yesterday." "By whom?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Your brother's code," she said, "but the signature on the entry log wasn't his." I pressed a palm against the desk. "Did you see who it was?" "No, ma'am. The cameras in that wing are still being serviced. We only noticed because your file was marked as inactive since June." "June? For months before Ben's death." My throat tightened. "Do me a favor," I said quietly. "Lock it down. No one gets in. I'll come by this afternoon." "Yes, ma'am." When the call ended, I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in a minute. I stood very still, feeling the kind of focus that doesn't come from calm. It comes from being startled awake by the wrong detail at the wrong time. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the branches against the window like knuckles on glass. By noon, I was driving west along Haven Road, toward the Ridgeview complex, one of those industrial stretches that lives between usefulness and abandonment. Rows of metal doors, sun-bleach numbers, and a thin smell of oil that never really leaves the air. The manager, Elaine, met me out front, small woman, mid-50s, the kind who looked like she could rebuild a fence alone and not mention it. She handed me a clipboard with the entry log. "There," she said, tapping a signature line from the day before. It wasn't Ben's handwriting. It was smoother, younger, and painfully familiar. Ryan. My stomach dropped a fraction. Slow and deliberate. "He came in yesterday afternoon." About 2:30. Said he was checking on behalf of the family. Had the code and key card. Very polite. I forced a nod. "Thank you, Elaine. I'll handle it from here." She hesitated. He took a box, just one. Small, square. Said it was sentimental. Sentimental. That word again. The universal translation for none of your business. When she left, I entered the unit. The metal door groaned open, revealing what looked like Ben's version of a time capsule. Sealed plastic bins labeled files, an old radio, boxes of records. Everything neat, deliberate. Only one empty space near the back shelf. The dust marked where something had been. A small box. Gone. I crouched there for a long time, not to cry, but to think. Ben had written, "Start with the lake house." Ryan had already started with the storage unit. Whatever this was, it wasn't random grief cleanup. It was a race, one I hadn't known I was running. That evening, Carla called. "I just received an email from Ryan," she said. "He's asking about the residual accounts. I told him all communication must go through you. But he mentioned a property by a lake? I didn't see that in the file." My hand tightened around the phone. Neither did I. Should I be concerned? I hesitated. Not yet, but keep everything sealed. If anyone requests access, you call me first. Understood. When I hung up, The house felt too large again. Every sound stretched longer. The refrigerator hum, the click of the thermostat, my own breathing. I walked into Ben's office once more, turned on the lamp, and looked at the key again. Brass, heavy, engraved faintly with L12. Lake House. Ledger 1, not 2. Ryan moving boxes behind my back. And Chloe, who hadn't texted all day, silence always her strategy when she wanted to appear uninvolved. Ben had trusted me with an unfinished equation. I would finish it. That night, as the wind pressed against the windows, I opened my notebook and wrote 4 new lines. Verify the lake property. Track Ryan's withdrawal. Revisit Ben's files. Look for mention of L12. Do not assume blood means trust. Then I turned off every light except the one above the desk and sat in the quiet until the clock struck 10. The honey roll bag still sat on the counter untouched. The sweetness had hardened, but it was still there, a small metaphor, sitting under plastic, pretending time hadn't changed it. I looked at the door again, solid, unyielding, and whispered the same promise I'd made last night, softer this time but firmer in meaning. I opened nothing I didn't choose. By morning, the sky had that bleached look that comes before rain. Not gray, not white, just colorless enough to make you hesitate. I packed a thermos, the key marked L12, and Ben's first ledger into the passenger seat. The drive to the lake was just under 2 hours, long enough to think, too short to forget. The GPS led me along back roads lined with bare trees and abandoned barns, places where even the birds sounded far away. The world felt unbothered by what I was chasing. About 10 miles past Ash Grove, the road narrowed into a gravel lane, the kind that looks like it should have ended a mile earlier. A wooden sign leaned to one side. Linden Shores, private. The key in my pocket felt heavier the closer I got. The lake appeared suddenly, a stretch of water that looked darker than the sky. On the far edge sat a modest cabin with a sagging porch, blinds drawn, and a single wind chime that refused to move. Ben had owned dozens of properties, but this one looked like a secret, not an investment. The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a click that echoed. Inside, the air was stale, not abandoned, just waiting. Dust floated like thin paper in the light from the window. There were no signs of squatters or recent visitors, just a few personal things left behind: an old thermos, a folded flannel, a stack of unopened mail. The electricity still worked. On the kitchen table sat a metal cash box with a combination lock. I turned it over, searching for clues, until a scrap of masking tape caught my eye. Same as storage. Storage. Ridgeview. Ben had always believed in codes that only made sense when you held all the pieces. I tried the 6-digit number from Ben's last rental invoice. The renewal date, 061423. The lock snapped open. Inside, several envelopes bound together, each labeled with a single name. Most I didn't recognize until the last one. Ryan Hart. The envelope was thin, folded twice. Inside was a photocopy of a driver's license that wasn't his. A man maybe 10 years older, same last name, similar features, and a single line of Ben's handwriting. Confirm before you trust. One of them isn't who they claim to be. For a long moment, the room seemed to shrink around me. The hum of the refrigerator turned into a low, insistent pulse. My brother, meticulous to the end, had been investigating someone. Someone close. I sank into the chair and stared at the note until the letters blurred. A car door slammed outside. My pulse jumped. Through the slats of the blinds, I caught a flash of movement. Dark jacket, familiar stance. Ryan. He was supposed to be in Columbus. I didn't move right away. He walked toward the porch, phone in hand, looking calm, like a man arriving exactly where he intended to be. The crunch of gravel under his shoes was painfully deliberate. He knocked 3 times. Mom. His voice was easy, casual, the kind used for borrowed tools and friendly neighbors. Public records mentioned a lake parcel. I figured you'd check it. Thought you could use some help going through Ben's things. I didn't answer. The word help carried the same weight it had before. Too smooth to trust. Mom, he said again, softer. Please open up. Silence stretched thin between us. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like someone slowly tearing paper. I could see his reflection in the glass, patient, head tilted, waiting for permission. I imagined him trying the doorknob, maybe pressing lightly just to see if it would give. Then the faint buzz of his phone. He glanced down, read something, and nodded to himself. The next second, his tone changed. Look, if you don't want to see me, that's fine. But you should know, I already found the place near the lake in Ben's paperwork. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. He paused. You know how he was. Always hiding things. The irony almost made me laugh. I waited until I heard his footsteps retreat. Then I counted to 30 before I breathed properly again. When I stepped onto the porch, his car was gone, a black sedan disappearing between the trees. Only the sound of the wind and the faint knock of the chime remained. I went back inside and locked the door. That evening, I spread everything across the table. The key, the notebook, the cash box, and Ben's note. The words looked heavier than paper. Ben had been right about one thing. People circle before they strike. Ryan had been circling for days. I pulled out my phone and called Carla. Something's wrong, I said. What happened? I found a property not listed in the will, and someone's been here. Who? My son. There was a pause. Do you want me to call the authorities? Not yet, I said, but I need you to send me every file Ben transferred in the last 6 months, especially anything connected to the name Linden or Ridgeview. I'll have it couriered by morning. When the call ended, I looked back at the window. My reflection stared back. Not frightened, just sharper than before. Ben hadn't left me a mystery to mourn. He'd left me one to solve. And if Ryan was part of that mystery, then whatever I discovered next would determine which one of us had been living a lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table until the rain started, drumming gently on the roof, soft, rhythmic, patient. The kind of rain that sounds like someone thinking. At 2:17 a.m., a message buzzed on my phone. You shouldn't be there alone. Call me, Ryan. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened Ben's letter again, the last one. I noticed something I'd missed before. Faint indentations under the signature, like words written and erased. I shaded over them lightly with a pencil. 3 new words appeared. Almost invisible, but legible enough. Trust records, not blood. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the darkness, the wind chime finally moved, a slow, deliberate sound that felt less like music and more like warning. The storm lasted through dawn. By the time the rain stopped, the sky looked rinsed, pale blue, thin clouds stretched like gauze. The cabin smelled of wet wood and burnt coffee. I'd been awake most of the night, watching the windows, half listening for tires on gravel. At 6:43, a delivery van appeared down the lane, moving cautiously through puddles. The driver stepped out, checked the address, and handed me a small envelope stamped with Carla's firm logo. Inside, photocopies of property transfers, account logs, and one document I hadn't expected to see. A transfer of ownership for Linden Shores, Lot 12, dated 2 weeks before Ben's death. The signature wasn't Ben's. It was Ryan's. For a long moment, I just stared at it, tracing the pen pressure, the angle of the letters. He'd forged it and done it well. The notary's seal was genuine. The notary had been tricked with a credible ID and a rehearsed signature. Real seal, false signer. He'd had help. I stepped back, letting the paper dangle from my fingers. My brother had trusted me with his records. My son had been dismantling them. The kettle clicked off, breaking the silence. I poured water over instant coffee, though I couldn't taste it. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. It was Chloe. Her voice was cautious, almost brittle. Mom, are you okay? I swallowed a dozen things I wanted to say. How did you know I was here? Ryan told me. He said you were staying at the lake house. He's worried. Is that what he told you? She hesitated. He said you've been confused since Uncle Ben passed. I felt the room tilt slightly. Confused. That's what he said. I didn't. She stopped herself, then lowered her voice. Mom, please. Come home. We can talk there. You don't have to stay out in the middle of nowhere. Her words were shaped like care, but they landed like strategy. I'd been in too many quiet wars to miss it. I'll come when I'm ready, I said. Ryan just wants what's best for you. Then he should stop using my brother's name to steal what isn't his. The silence on the line thickened. Then she said, almost whispering, he told me you'd say that. And she hung up. By afternoon, the lake was glassy and still. The wind had dropped, and everything felt suspended, as if waiting for a decision. I walked down to the dock with the folder tucked under my arm. The boards creaked underfoot, each step echoing across the water. Ben had brought me here once, years ago, before the children had drifted out of my orbit. He'd said, if anything ever happens, find what I left under the waterline. I'd thought he was joking, another one of his cryptic riddles that sounded too cinematic for real life. Now, standing there, I wondered if he'd meant it. The lake was calm enough to show my reflection clearly, older, thinner, but steadier than I expected. I crouched near the edge, where the wooden posts met the water, and felt along the underside. My fingertips brushed metal, cold, slick. I pulled. A tin box, rusted shut but unmistakably placed. Ben's handwriting scratched faintly on the top, Ledger 1 Private. I pried it open with the cabin's kitchen knife. Inside were 3 USB drives, wrapped in plastic, and a single photograph. Ben shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. On the back, he'd written, if anything happens to me, he's the reason. That night, I plugged the first drive into my old laptop. Folders appeared. Contracts, Ridgeview, Linden, Ryan. Inside the last one were scanned bank statements, transaction reports, and emails sent from an address I recognized as Ryan's, but to names I didn't know. Names that connected to the forged documents. He'd been moving money under Ben's companies for nearly a year. Each file was meticulous, each lie documented. My brother must have discovered it months before his death. And now I had proof that Ryan had a motive to keep those files buried. I sat back in the chair and let the truth settle over me. Slow, heavy, irreversible. Ryan hadn't come to help. He'd come to finish what Ben had stopped him from doing. At 9:12 p.m., headlights appeared at the top of the hill. The same black sedan. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood in the shadow by the window. The car idled for a full minute before the engine cut. The porch steps creaked once. Then silence. No knock this time. Just a voice, steady, polite, too calm. Mom, I know you found something. Let's talk about it before anyone else gets involved. I didn't move. He sighed as if disappointed. You always taught me not to run from responsibility. Don't start now. I almost laughed. The hypocrisy of it, turning my words into his weapons, was almost artful. He waited another moment. I'll come back in the morning. Don't do anything rash. The sound of gravel under tires again, retreating down the lane. When he was gone, I sank into the chair, my heartbeat matching the rhythm of the clock on the wall. Ben had been right all along. The real danger wasn't outside the family. It was made by it. Before sleeping, I wrote 2 things in my notebook. Blood is not proof of loyalty. Mourning will require witnesses. And under that, in smaller letters, he's coming back. I'll be ready. The morning arrived gray and without ceremony. No birds, no wind, just a silence that felt too deliberate. I had slept only in fragments, my mind replaying Ben's last note, the forged signature, the voice outside my door. By 7, the mist on the lake had thinned to a silver veil. I stood by the window, the USB drives in my pocket, watching for the black sedan that I knew would come. Instead, a beige sedan pulled up first, smaller, careful. Carla. She stepped out in a navy coat, holding a folder close against her chest. When I opened the door, she searched my face the way doctors do before saying something difficult. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I've been better." She exhaled softly. "You were right about the signatures. They're fraudulent. The county records confirmed it this morning." For a moment, the words didn't even land. They just hovered between us. Proof without comfort. She handed me the folder. Ben was preparing to revoke Ryan's power of attorney. The paperwork was never filed. "It's dated 3 days before your brother's death." 3 days. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. Carla's voice steadied. "I've already notified the estate board. Once they verify, all transactions are frozen. No one can touch a cent until this is resolved." "Thank you," I said, my throat dry. "But that means Ryan knows he's out of time." Carla hesitated. "Do you want me to call the police?" "Not yet," I said quietly. "I need him to show his hand first." She didn't argue. Lawyers rarely do when the truth has already chosen its path. At 9:40 a.m., Ryan's car appeared at the curve of the drive, exactly as expected. He parked, straightened his jacket, and walked up the steps with the unhurried confidence of someone who still believed in his own story. Carla stepped back, eyes sharp but unreadable. "Mom," he said, smiling as if the last 24 hours hadn't existed, "I'm glad you're not alone." I didn't return the smile. "You should be careful what you're glad about." He looked at Carla, then at me. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just wanted to help manage Ben's assets. You know how complicated he made everything." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's one word for it." Carla laid the folder on the table. "Mr. Hart, we've reviewed the documents you filed. Your signature appears on property transfers executed after your uncle's death. That's a federal offense." His expression flickered. Not guilt, not fear, just calculation. "Someone must have copied my information," he said smoothly. "You can't seriously think." I cut him off. "Elaine from Ridgeview saw you. You signed the log yourself." He turned toward me, the warmth leaving his face. "I was protecting what's ours." "It's not yours," I said, "and it never was." The words landed harder than I meant. Something behind his eyes shifted, the calm cracked. "You don't understand what he did," he said. "Ben wasn't protecting you. He was cutting us out." "Us?" I asked. "Or you?" He didn't answer. Carla lifted her phone discreetly. "Mr. Hart, I suggest you leave before this becomes formal." For a second, I thought he might lunge, say something cruel enough to scar the air between us. Instead, he laughed, short, sharp, practiced. "You've always needed someone to blame," he said. "You lost Ben, and now you want to lose me too." "Ben trusted me," I said, "and you broke that trust before he was even gone." He looked at me for a long time, the kind of stare that carries more history than words ever can, then turned and walked out. The gravel crunched, the engine started, and the sound faded down the road. Carla stayed until the paperwork was sealed and the locks were changed. When she finally left, the house felt lighter, emptier, truer. I made tea instead of coffee this time, letting the warmth travel slow through me. Ben's tin box still sat on the table, the photo of him and the unknown man catching the afternoon light. I turned it over again. On the back corner, in smaller letters, he'd written something I hadn't noticed. "Ask for Grant Miller, County Records Office." I smiled, a tired, private smile. Ben never left a mystery without a compass. Tomorrow I'd drive into town, find this Grant Miller, and finally ask the question that had been building since the moment Ryan forged that signature. Why had Ben trusted me with the truth and Ryan with the lie? Outside, the lake rippled once, disturbed by wind or memory. I couldn't tell which. I closed the curtains, switched off the lights, and whispered the same vow that had carried me through the storm. Access is earned, not assumed. Only this time, I added one more line under my breath. a promise, not a warning. And I will finish what Ben started. 2 days later, I drove back into the city. The highway cut clean through farmland and quiet neighborhoods, the kind that look half asleep even in daylight. I didn't turn on the radio. Silence had become its own kind of company, an honest one. The county records office sat on a corner near downtown Columbus. Old stone building, clock tower that hadn't worked in years. Inside, the air was dry, full of paper and old secrets. A man at the front desk looked up as I entered. Late 50s, silver hair, cautious kindness in his eyes. The tag on his shirt read Grant Miller. I said, "My brother mentioned your name." "Ben Hart." Recognition flickered across his face, a mix of relief and something darker. He gestured toward his office. I was wondering when someone from his family would show up. I followed him inside. Stacks of file boxes lined the wall, neatly labeled. He closed the door behind us, not to be secretive, but to be respectful. He told me if anything happened to him, Grant said, I should hand you this. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, heavy with documents. Ben's handwriting again. My name across the front. I opened it carefully. Inside, a final letter and several certified copies of deeds and transfer notes. The words were few, the kind of brevity that only comes when someone has already said everything that mattered. You were right about people, Evie. They don't change. They just grow quieter about what they want. I left the lake property in your name because it's not real estate, it's proof. The man in the photograph tried to buy me out. When I refused, Ryan took his side. I forgave him before I died. You don't have to. Just don't let what I built become what broke us. Ben. The paper trembled a little in my hands, not from fear, but from recognition. All the codes, the ledgers, the missing files, they weren't puzzles. They were insurance. Evidence he'd collected when he realized his own family had been compromised. Grant spoke quietly. Your brother was trying to protect you. He said you were the only one who wouldn't sell the truth for convenience. I nodded, unable to answer. He hesitated before adding, the man in that photo, his name's Harold Pierce. Real estate investor. 2 years ago, he and your son started a shell company together. We've already filed for review. If you want, we can freeze the assets immediately. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and said, do it! That evening, I drove back to the lake. The water was still. Sky turned copper by the sunset. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Same dock, same wind chime, same quiet. But the silence no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. I unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside. The space was clean, simple. Ben had always believed peace didn't need decoration, just honesty. On the table, I set the envelope beside the tin box. Then I took out my notebook, the one I'd been filling since the first day. I drew a single line across the last page, steady, deliberate, and wrote 3 words beneath it. Ben was right. The air felt different after that. Lighter, warmer. Maybe that's what closure really is. Not forgiveness, not victory. Just the moment when the noise stops meaning anything. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and pine. The chime moved once, softly like acknowledgement. I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the lake darken into night. Somewhere out there, Ryan was facing what he'd made. Maybe he'd change. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my story anymore. When I finally turned off the light, I didn't lock the door out of fear. I locked it out of choice. And for the first time since Ben's death, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like home. A week later, Carla called to say the investigation had closed. The forged signatures voided. The properties restored. Everything under Ben's name, now mine. She asked what I planned to do with the lake house. I told her I'd keep it, not as an asset, but as evidence that truth can survive inside the quiet if you're patient enough to listen. After the call, I stood on the porch, watching the light slide across the water. Somewhere in that reflection, I could almost hear Ben's voice again, Calm, amused, certain. Mercy and boundaries, Evie. Cousins. Don't invite one without the other. I smiled. I know, I said softly to the air. I finally learned. And the wind answered with a single breath across the lake, a sound that might have been coincidence, or might have been gratitude. Either way, it was enough.